Wes Mussio, thank you so much for joining me today. For everyone who doesn't know you, I've had you on the show several times. You're an entertaining guy to talk to. You've decided you're down in Florida now. You're I guess what would that make you, a fair weather Canadian at this point?
Yeah, snowbird, I guess you'd call it. But yeah, I'm enjoying the nice sunshine down here and not the wet coast in Vancouver.
Right. So you're a Vancouver native. You've been active, really active in, well, both politics. You're a lawyer. Wait, hockey coach? What part of that does that come in? I don't know. I was reading something about you own a hockey team in the
Yeah,
West. Or is that still a thing?
well, I owned six teams at one point a couple of years ago, and they're all junior A teams, and then I've divested from some of them. I still have one that I still semi own, but sort of moved out of there and trying to do other fun things. Hockey was always my aspiration, and I enjoyed it. And I like to go to the NHL hockey games for Florida Panthers and say, "Oh, I coached this fellow, or I knew him, or he was on my team." So it sort of gives me an interesting perspective on hockey when you can brag about all these kids that came through your programs or you coached or whatnot. But
Oh, that's
but
awesome.
but my main job is lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 35 years, and last year I actually wrote the U.S. bar exam, national bar exam, and aced it. And now I'm a lawyer in the U.S. as well as in Canada, which is quite unique.
That is quite unique. How different is the law from one place to the other?
Oh, amazingly different. You'd be shocked. Well, they both came from the same, common law system of England, but they departed very much so. When I studied, it was 17 courses I had to take, and they were almost all different than Canada law. I mean, there's some similarities, but procedurally and a lot of the substantive law is completely different. The U.S. moves cases along much better than Canada. Canada's a slow-moving venture, and the U.S. is a lot more hard-hitting, and basically, they decide how the cases go, and that's it. So it's a very strong system compared to the Canadian system. I definitely prefer the U.S. system over Canada for sure.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's good to know. I had no idea. I didn't like. I knew that Quebec law is very fundamentally different than the rest of Canadian law, but I didn't know that there was like that much of a difference between Canada, U.S.
Well, to tell you about the changes or differences, Louisiana has similar law to Quebec because they're both from the French system,
Oh,
civil system, and so you have that unique law down in Louisiana,
oh,
and
that's
it's
an
similar.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. The Acadians or the Cajuns, the people down there. I didn't realize. Yeah, they brought their baggage with them. I guess
Yeah.
that's that's a good thing. Apparently the culture's a little better and the food as well. So well, let's get right into it. The reason why I have you on the show today is because you've been doing some serious critique to what's been going on with property law in British Columbia specifically. But I guess this would affect all of Canada because of some of the decisions that have been made here. Now, this in particular was, well, we heard about what happened in Richmond. There was, and I'm drawing a blank on the band, a bunch of people from 300 years ago said that my great grandpappy used to fish here. So now we own your condo, essentially, is like what it really came down to. And now it's the Musqueam tribe just made an even larger land. What is it? It's an acknowledgement of their ownership, or how does this work? I don't understand it really.
Well, I mean, it's. I think we're going down a catastrophic sinkhole for British Columbia, and then it will no doubt apply to the rest of Canada in short order. But basically, since the Constitution was changed to add in Section 35 to constitutionally uphold Aboriginal rights, the courts of the Supreme Court of Canada and other courts have been steadily increasing what those rights are. And this is just a continual, proliferation of what I say is a movement towards granting large scale rights to Aboriginal bands. And so the key on all this is the definition of Aboriginal rights. And that's where, unfortunately, the courts and also like the government of Canada through that recent agreement with the Musqueams have been using that term, which is a term of art in legal terms. And that term of art basically says in summary, it's almost identical to every right you have as a owner and fee simple of your land. So if you own a piece of property and you get to use it, quiet enjoyment, and you can mortgage it and all those sort of things, well, basically the courts have slowly evolved the definition of Aboriginal title and rights to be exactly or near, ownership rights. And so that there lies the problem when you suddenly have a whole slew of different areas, lower mainland and North Shore, West Van, Vancouver, you name it, and they're all now suddenly acknowledged to be an Aboriginal title over them. Well, you're basically opening a can of worms, that's for sure, especially given the law that's evolved, and it has been ever evolving in favor of the Aboriginals over time.
So we're looking at like literally trillions of dollars worth of real estate. It's like you look at the map of where this claim is. It's all of North Vancouver, West Vancouver. There's I think it goes all the way up to Lions Bay, and there's like a good chunk of land there. Now, explain to me this, because okay, so this is difficult for a lot of people to understand. In Canada, there is no guarantee to property rights, correct?
Well, here's the problem. So originally, when the Constitution was being drafted and the Charter of Rights and Freedom back in 1982, there was a lot of thought. Okay, we got to put property ownership as a constitutional right, and people that were involved in drafting the paper decided against it for whatever reason. But at the last minute, they put in Aboriginal rights as a constitutional entrenched right. So there's the problem is you have Aboriginal title, which is almost the same according to several Supreme Court of Canada decisions, and UNDRIP, which is that UN Declaration on Aboriginal Rights. Basically, it equates Aboriginal title to be virtually the same as your land title rights. So if you take something that's constitutionally entrenched and you compare it against something that isn't constitutionally entrenched, gets who has superior interest. Well, that's the Aboriginal title, and that's what happened in that Cowichan tribe, decision out of Richmond in 2015. I say that the judge rightly said that Aboriginal title is superior and prior to land title ownership by non-Aboriginals. Now, I don't agree with the decision, but on the law, it's hard to say how she was wrong, and that's the problem.
So it's just written that way, so they have to award it accordingly.
Yeah, and so I know David Eby, the premier of British Columbia, who I do not like and disagree with wholeheartedly, but nonetheless,
I'm not going to side against you on that one.
He's blaming the courts and saying the courts are doing this. Well, no, you are doing that. So the way it works is you have a legislative assembly and you've got the members of parliament up in Ottawa, but these people have options to stop this trajectory that's heading in the wrong direction. And the wrong direction is that, Aboriginal title on land that is being acknowledged as having Aboriginal title will eventually supersede or take over private land ownership. And so what's the answer to that? Well, I can tell you what it is. So there was a case out of Ontario that came down in 2025. So last year, the Ontario Court of Appeal agreed with the Aboriginal claim that took away 2.5 kilometers of beachfront from all these private owners. And of course, you listen to them, oh, it was only the beachfront. Well, all these people now have land that's landlocked because they don't even have a beach anymore. And the rationale for that is that at the time that these deeds were given to these people, like 150 years ago, and passed on or sold off or whatever, at that time, the Crown didn't have the right to give away the land because it was Aboriginal title. And so the end result was that this land was given back or returned to the Aboriginals. So of course that, what's going to happen, we don't know, but there's a clear example where the Ontario Court of Appeal, and by the way, the Supreme Court of Canada didn't bother to review this, so they must have thought it was good law. And so you have a case there where clearly private land ownership was taken back or will be taken back and given to Aboriginal tribe out there because they, it's Aboriginal title, and it supersedes private ownership of land. And so, the big issue that's come out here is the Musqueam Indian Band, rightfully, and I don't blame them. They negotiated a deal which gave them a vast swath of the Lower Mainland as Aboriginal title, and that word itself is a killer, because it on the current law, unless something changes and there's some regression in the law, it basically gives Aboriginal title, prior and ownership over land. So how do you reconcile that? Well, all kinds of things could happen. But as I said in some of my articles I've written, is the government can turn around and just simply change that agreement to say that private land does not apply, that there's no Aboriginal title over private land, and the whole discussion would be over. But they haven't done that. So where are they going on this would be the question I'd have to ask, when it's that simple that they could get rid of this complete worry that everyone has, including myself, over what's going to happen in 10 years or 5 years to all. What are these Aboriginal bands going to do in terms of advancing their interests? Are they going to try to take private property, tax it, start limiting what you can do with it? Who knows, right? But the problem is it's a big legal quagmire. But the law, as I read it, strictly reading the law, we're in deep trouble.
No kid. So you're saying that the legislature can sign into law something that would make it impossible for them to do that, or how does that
Well,
work?
I'm starting with, okay, we'll start with the Aboriginal, the Musqueam agree.
Whoa. Hurricane struck Florida, it looks like. Well, we'll get Wes back in just a sec. Looks like he's dropped off. Hopefully that connection goes right back to us. In the meantime, holy cow, you guys are jumping in with your questions. So we'll get to some of those until Wes gets back. But well, let's hope that's all good. Yeah, let's get into some of these questions. Listen, this sounds to me more like a monarchy problem than a taxpayer problem. It's definitely a taxpayer problem. If you're the one that owns the land and you're a taxpayer, that would be a big issue. England will hand the country back, and natives will elect a king. Well, we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening with that. Hoping that Wes gets back in here soon. So I'll close that down just until we can get Wes back. Let me pop this window over to the other side as well, so you can see things better. Sorry about that, folks. Let's get back to some of the current comments. Thank you for what you do. Yeah, you're welcome. You're absolutely welcome. Appreciate that. I'm glad to bring these impromptu streams in and bring guests on, because I think a lot of these things, just that we need to be addressing these things more and talking about them. It doesn't seem like there's enough real talk on it. It seems like a lot of people just want to kind of dodge this this whole situation, look at it, or just la let's not talk about it, it'll go away, or something like that. I'm just gonna text Wes and say, listen, we've dropped out, can you rejoin? Send that off to Wes here. Hey, Wes, we lost you on the connection. Are you able to join back in? Are you able to join back in? Okay. Sometimes we just have connection issues. That's it. So let's get back to this. Wesley's entered the room again. There we go. We're
Sorry
back.
about
We got a third
What
Wes
happened?
in
Somebody
here.
gave me a phone call. I think it jumped me out.
Oh, is that what? Okay, fair
I don't
enough.
know where I
fair
was
enough.
at, but I was rambling about my concerns over the law as it's evolved over the last 20, 30 years, and the governments of British Columbia and Canada being complicit in advancing the Aboriginal entitlement. That's for sure.
Okay, let me just get everything back here.
Are
One
you there?
second. Yeah. No, I'm here. I'm here. I just need to get everything back on the right screen, and then we'll get things going here. Back. Okay, good. Here we are. Perfect. Yeah. So, and we lost you again. There we go. I thought we lost you again. It went dark for a second. All right, Wes, we good? Oh, maybe we did. Maybe we did lose him. Okay. This might be a technical difficulty stream. One of those. Wes is back in the room with another one. We got two Wes's here. All right.
Okay, there you go. Let's try that one.
Okay,
how's that
perfect.
working?
It's good. It's good. All right. So yeah, the question was then, so if what should people think about this? Because a lot of people are sticking their fingers in their ears, going la 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 about this whole subject and pretending that it's not even an issue. What sort of like, should people worry? I mean, people who live in these areas that
Give me a second. I'll try another phone.
Okay, it's not working. All right. We'll get you back in a sec here. He's popping out on that one. All right. Well, we'll get the answer to that. Yeah, put a clone in there for a sec. All right. Just waiting for him to pop back in. Hey, these things happen. It's what happens when you do shows live. It just gets it gets hectic sometimes. Here we go. Okay, sounds good to me.
Let's try this.
All right. So the question is, people are, some people are just, ignoring the whole situation. But if you're a landowner, say you own a condo or you own a house or even a farm or whatever on this property, a business, that kind of thing, what kind of worries do you have that the Musqueam can come in and just evict you from your property, or come in and say, well, you owe us taxes now, or we're leasing you the property, you now have to pay us rent? Like, what is the actual possibility of that kind of thing happening?
I honestly believe it's a high likelihood that it's going to happen unless, somebody does something right now about that agreement. The Musqueam agreement has to be revised so that it specifically excludes private ownership, or it doesn't have constitutional entrenchment. Because the problem with an agreement like that is it, under Section 35 of the Constitution, it becomes quasi-constitutional, right? And so then, of course, if it has quasi-constitutional, then the Aboriginal title supersedes or is higher than land title for the average guy like me and you. So they have to stop this, or else, 5 years from now or whatever it is, suddenly, people start suing. Landowners are starting to walk in and say, hey, I'm going to, tax you, or I'm going to take your land, or whatever it is. And on the law, they'd be pretty set to be able to do that, short of some changes in the agreement, and short of some strong assurances through the legislation or otherwise. So as it stands right now, I would say it's a significant risk. And of course, the federal government says, oh, no, nothing to see here. And the Musqueam Band says, oh, nothing, we're not going to take your land. But, being the devil's advocate, I don't buy those for a moment, because how many times have you been lied to by a politician or a person that perhaps is going to be benefiting from something?
Or a native band.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to sound prejudicial, but if you think back on the Musqueam Indian Band Reserve Number 2 from the 1990s, they were trying to, these people back in the 60s put houses on their, the land. And then what transpired was they were paying like $400 a month, or a year for renting the place. Plus they were paying property tax to the Musqueam. Well, guess what happened in the 1990s? The Musqueams tried to jack that up to something $30,000 to $40,000, which is in today's terms like $70,000 to $80,000. And then they lost in the Supreme Court of Canada, got reduced to $10,000. But when they came up for renewal again, they jacked them up, or tried to jack them up to $60,000 to $150,000 a year for these people that actually built the house. And again, it was negotiated down, but a substantial amount. So what I'm saying there is the the Musqueam have a history of not necessarily being good neighbors, as it were, because if you put a 5,000% increase on rental of a person in the city of Vancouver, you don't think the you get a little bit of a problem legally? The residential tenancy branch would come down on you pretty hard. But so my point is that, there's been a history, and it's the same chief that did that as that's running the thing now. So how, if you've already struck at your neighbors previously, how can we guarantee that you're not going to do it again? And the answer would be to change that agreement so it excludes private property and admit to that. But no one's doing that, and that's why it causes me a lot of concern that, the fact that the obvious answer on how to to send the strong message to the people, hey, we're not going after your land, they just ignore it, and they just say, oh, no, trust me, just trust me. When's the last time do you trust politicians? It would be my response to that. Well, of course you don't, because every time they open their mouth, they're probably not telling you the straight goods, as we all know with every politician, both sides of the fence, of course.
So we haven't heard anything since the Musqueam decision here, but the previous decision in Richmond, just in part of Richmond, we saw some of the adverse effects from that. There was one property owner who went to refinance through his mortgage lender, and they denied his refinancing. They basically said, "Yeah, we don't want anything to do with this property anymore. We're not going to refinance for you." So how could this can that spread? Is what I'm trying to ask. Like, if that spreads, that's mayhem for the entire Lower Mainland, is it not?
Well, it is, but it depends on how this gets maneuvered. I know that the federal government, no doubt, is having multiple meetings to try to put less in the angst. And if they follow something that I've been advocating on this show and others, to exclude it right out of the agreement, then it's a nothing burger. Then whatever, well, I guess the whatever part that I should mention is, now when you have the way it works is you have to consult with an Aboriginal band if they have a claim for land. So all over the province, there's almost 100% of the province, if not more, is covered by these. So if a Aboriginal band has a claim for an Aboriginal title on a certain part, you've got to consult with them, but you don't have to get their consent. If you look at the case law, as soon as you say Aboriginal title, or you give Aboriginal title, which the federal government have over extensive part of Vancouver, then it becomes not consultation, it comes consent. And the fact that the federal government put in UNDRIP, into the agreement, said that was the minimum standard. Well, you got to get free, prior, and informed consent on everything that affects the territory. And since the territory is basically a vast portion of the Lower Mainland, then by inference, applying the case law, then everyone has to get consent from the Aboriginals to do anything, including changing zoning and building a house or whatnot. Now, whether or not the Musqueam actually go ahead and enforce that, hopefully they don't. But what's preventing them from doing that? Because as soon as they get that designation as Aboriginal title, it moves from from a consultation to an actual consent. And in many instances, people view the UNDRIP consent as being a veto power, the free, prior, and informed consent, right? So that's also a big problem that people are going to start facing. So I just want to point out that these are if, buts, or maybes, and I pray that the First Nations band or the federal government don't actually go forward on this agreement. But if they do, and they said they are going to, then it could be mayhem, because you've given this Aboriginal title over huge swath of the Lower Mainland, and that definition itself is basically equivalent to land in fee simple, as well as veto power, consent, free, prior, and informed consent. So it's pretty captivating, and I'm deeply concerned about it.
So what would this mean for someone who wants to sell their property? Say they own a piece of property on this land and they say, okay, well, I want to get out before anything happens. Does do they do the natives have a say over like who it gets sold to at this point? Because they seem to
Well,
have a lot of
y-
weight in this legally.
yeah, I mean, as soon as they start advancing that, then the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, and you know where they're heading on all this. But you know,
Hmm.
even in the Richmond, the Cowichan tribe, you know, was asked about this very question you're posing, and what the lawyer for the band had said was that basically, yeah, you should probably get our consent to sell or move a property.
Oh,
So
whoa.
they're already you know, chomping at the bit there for, you know, control, unfortunately, and you know, justifiably so, because they've got a judgment, and you know, everyone's saying, oh, it's going to be appealed and it's going to win. Well, I'm not sure. If I was a betting man, I'd say there's a high likelihood it's not going to be successfully appealed in its entirety. There's going to be some ramification. I just hope that you know, the higher courts you know, see through their progressive activism that might exist. I don't know if it does, but and move towards a more conservative viewpoint, which might exist with them. I don't know, but if they don't basically go ultra conservative on this, on their judgment, it's going to be quite a catastrophic impact to British Columbia and soon to be Canada.
So what does this mean for utilities such as the Port of Vancouver? So like that's a major artery that brings goods and services in through and to the rest of Canada, Western Canada at least, or you know, shipments of things that come in from China tend to go through the Port of Vancouver before they get shipped onto trucks and then out
Well,
through the rest of Canada. That falls on that land now too, right?
yeah, I mean, there's a obviously an economic impact. They'll want their share of the money that's coming through. But the bigger problem I'm going to suggest to you is if you look at the Sunshine Coast, and you might not be familiar with this agreement, I've been helping in the background the Pender Harbor Residents Association, who are fighting this in court. But basically, the provincial government just around the last election, gave the Indian band or the Aboriginal band in that region 50% control over the foreshore. And then what the original plan was is to rip out all the docks of all these people in on the Sunshine Coast. And one of my close friends has got an island with a nice big dock because he has a big boat, and you know, he was, you know, obviously concerned. So the rationale for that from that band was, oh, we got to return the seagrass to the foreshore. Well, is that going to be what's going to happen in Vancouver? You know, suddenly people are saying, oh, you can't have a port because you know, we have to return it to its natural state. And if you look at UNDRIP, you'll notice that in UNDRIP, which is the, you know, the United Nations Declaration, it specifically says that the land should be returned to its original state for Aboriginal use. So, I mean, on the, you know, the
These are
real
serious
cynical,
people. Like these are serious people. Are you like that's I'm sorry. Like it's just that is the most ridiculous thing I've freaking ever heard in my life. That they want to take modern society and they want to like seriously return it back to its natural state. This is
well,
the stated goal.
you read UNDRIP, and that's what it
What
says.
the actual hell, man? Like I'm
I
not
know.
kidding. That's ludicrous. That is just absolutely bonkers.
Well, you look at it, it was put in place in 2007. It took a number of years to get through, and the countries that voted against it as a declaration was, oh, Canada, oh, the US, oh, Australia, oh, New Zealand. And if you look around the world, guess who's got the Aboriginal populations? You name it. I just told you. You know, there's
Right.
probably some other ones I'm sure kicking around the rest of the world, but those are the big ones. And if you skip forward from 2007 to currently, Australia is going through the same sort of uncertainty about ownership as Canada is right now. And of course, the U.S. You know, put a curb on all this, but there is still in some of the democratic states like California this this land back movement is starting to evolve. You might have seen in one of the award ceremony some rapper had said, illegal people are cannot be illegal on stolen land. So there's a stolen
Oh,
land
right.
thought going around in the U.S. But thankfully for the U.S., it's not quite as prevalent up in Canada. But there's a lot of people, unfortunately, and that are convinced that things should return to the way they were, and a deindustrialization or whatever you call. And this is part of that whole scheme. I would say that from the United Nations, and if you read that agreement, it's or the declaration, you'd be like, oh no, this is not workable. And yet it was eventually signed on by Justin Trudeau in 2016. So just to keep in mind, Harper was in power at the time, and he said he would consider it, but it was sort of a ceremonial thing. And as soon as Trudeau got in 2016, he signed up for it. After Canada fought it for so many years at the UN level. It sort of shows the shift in politics, and then flip it forward another 10 years, and here we are, talking about something that 20 years ago, if I mentioned to you, hey, you might lose your land for an Aboriginal claim, you'd be looking at me like I'm some weirdo. Now I'm talking about it and trying to find ways to prevent that from happening, because it would be catastrophic to Canada and British Columbia and the economy. I mean, imagine the uncertainty if it happens. So I'm just praying that the courts will come out and see the catastrophe that could occur if they continue to evolve Aboriginal title and the rights of Aboriginal people, as they have been over the last 20 years. If they continue to do that, it's very impactful. Needless to say, Canada won't be the way it is today for sure.
Well, I guess like the rhetorical question here would be like, were those people even really aware of what they were advocating for? So,
Of
Billie
course,
Eilish, for example, Billie
yeah.
Eilish was the rapper that you're talking about. So she said there's nobody's illegal on stolen land, but then she has like a $14 million mansion on some natives' property, and immediately people were like, "All right, well, give up your property, give it back to the natives." And of course, they're not going to, right? So there's a lot of lip service in this. There's a lot of people that go to their municipal town halls and they do these land acknowledgments, but at the heart of it, they're not actually like, yeah, I'm going to give up my property to some native people so that they could just willy-nilly take it, because we all know it's not going to go back to the original state of nature. This isn't Fern Gully, and it's ain't no comic book or cartoon, right, from the 90s. Like, this is reality, and people's properties actually at stake here. And what it looks like there's a bunch of unwitting idiots that have been going along with this sort of thing just to like feel good, like say the thing that makes you feel good in the moment. But now we're having actual legal repercussions. So how do we reverse this? Like, how do we? I know you said we could pass legislation, but like this could, or I guess the question is, could this go further throughout Canada, or is this something that's kind of isolated to BC because of the way some of the laws are written, or can this go further?
No, this can go right across Canada. And I already mentioned the Ontario decision out of Lake Huron, where the Aboriginal band was given, after 150 plus years of not having the land. They were given 2.5 kilometers of beachfront, in a prime area on Lake Huron. Imagine like doing that to all the people on, let's say, Point Grey Road or over in West Vancouver, saying, "Oh, sorry, we just took over your beach. You don't own it anymore." Well, be pretty catastrophic for them. And
Yeah.
the other thing is in New Brunswick, there was a case that came out last year, which is, this is the one hope. There's a few hopes here, that calmer heads will prevail. And
Hmm.
in that case, what happened was the Aboriginal band was going after Western New Brunswick, a huge swath of land, and the Court of Appeal and the lower court said, no, 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 you can't go after private land. You can only go after Crown land. But I'm not, that will probably go to the Supreme Court of Canada. And so if it comes out negative, if the Supreme Court of Canada rules against that proposition, we're in trouble. But at least you have some courts in outside of British Columbia, New Brunswick, that are going in a more nuanced way, and you do see that on the bench of the BC Court of Appeal. What there was that decision about the mining tenure. I don't know if you've heard about that one, but
Is that the
basically,
uranium mining out that way?
no, just
No, a
mining
different one.
generally.
Oh,
So what
okay.
happens is I'm actually well versed in this because my father was a avid he was a metallurgical engineer, so we did staking when I was younger. And what you do is you'd find something that would interest you, and then you'd immediately run off and stake it, and then it's yours, and then you carry on. Well, they did it online, and then one of the Aboriginal bands fought it and said you can't do that because you haven't consulted or got our consent to have that that's claim. And the BC Court of Appeal said, yep, you're right, because UNDRIP says that we have to get basically free, prior, and informed consent. But there was one judge, the dissenting judge, that said this is crazy. We should. Well, I didn't say crazy, but he said that basically UNDRIP is just a political you know, determination, and it's not something that the judges should be applying and forcing on the government. And you heard David Eby cry foul, but if you look at the UNDRIP and DRIPA is the legislation that makes the UN Declaration our law in British Columbia. It says the government must, and I repeat, must have law consistent with UNDRIP, which means that all our law has to be tailored towards the Aboriginal rights. And so the court, in my view, just applied plain meaning of the word must and said, yeah, we must do that. And so your mining tenure system doesn't, you're not getting consent, free, prior, and informed consent from Aboriginal bands. So yeah, it's no good. But this is the problem. If you do that, then everything goes by the wayside. Like any resource development processes all have to go through that funnel of Aboriginal bands that might have Aboriginal title over the property, and it becomes somewhat unworkable, and an extra tax on businesses because they have to get the consent, and often have to come into agreements where they're sharing profits and so forth, and power over whatever they're doing. So it presents a real problem for British Columbia for sure.
So what about other provinces, especially if some things go through? There's a move in Alberta to separate and become its own country. Would this kind of baggage be brought with them, or is this something that's uh, completely a Canadian issue? And if they were to separate, they kind of dodge a bullet on that one.
No, I've been following that story, and my professional legal opinion is that the if this ever goes to an actual successful vote, there's going to be a whole array of litigation that involves Aboriginal bands fighting against the sovereignty, and they've already said that in those words. So, and I don't know what the answer would be, but there's been a few answers. One of which would be to separate out these reserves, because keep in mind that Alberta was largely treated. I don't think it's not like British Columbia, where 95% of British Columbia did not have, historic treaties. So, but you could sever out all these treaties, and people can still be Canadian within Alberta. I don't know how that would work, but the other option is that that Alberta undertake to take on the same obligations as Canada, which are, as I mentioned to you, given the advancement of the law by the Supreme Court of Canada and other judges, to increase the Aboriginal entitlement rights and title, then they're stuck with that. Basically, is what I'm saying. So I don't think Alberta can separate and get rid of the law that exists with regard to Aboriginal claims. They're stuck with it, and the difficulty is that British Columbia is going to be advancing the law in the coming years, unless something extraordinary happens. And I don't know what that is. I just don't think it's you can't negotiate these agreements because there's too many of them. I mean, you basically have to give away the entire province and tell the non-Aboriginal people to leave. I mean, are you going to do that? Probably not.
No, I can't see any of that happening. But this is all insane. So I mean, I don't even know. The bar of crazy has been lowered so low that I have no idea where this is gonna go. A good question I have is why is it that the United States isn't dealing with stuff like this? You understand U.S. law, you understand Canadian law. Is how have they largely avoided this crap?
It's not constitutionally entrenched under like a similar provision as Section 35 of the Constitution, which put in and entrenched Aboriginal rights into the Constitution. That's the first reason. The second reason is, and I don't want to get overly political, but you know, if you're talking Democrats and Republicans, they both sit right of even our conservative governments in Canada. So, and of course, you know, that flows through to the judiciary and all that, and the legislative enactments that are all, you know, pushing the Aboriginal agenda. So, what I'm trying to say politely, and I don't know if I can say it politely, but I'll try, is that Canada, its judiciary and its legislative assemblies are far more progressive than the U.S. And so they've allowed this development. Like, you know, if you look back in 1990, one of the, you know, Supreme Court of Canada decisions that started the tidal wave of these claims is, you know, started. It was, you know, it was a it was a very pro Aboriginal decision, but that was, if you look back on it, you think, oh, that was a good one, because what's come after that from the Supreme Court of Canada is nothing but an increase in Aboriginal rights and a decrease in non-Aboriginal you know, values in those decisions. So in other words, like a pointed continual improvement in Aboriginal title and rights over time by the Supreme Court of Canada. And that's why I get really a little worried here, because you know, in order for this to stop and us to return to you know, a system that everyone can live with, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, somebody needs to put the brakes on, like really hard. You're about to rear end a big semi truck, and you're in your little Pinto, and instead, you know, I see the courts and the governments that are in power actually hitting the acceleration, you know, hitting the gas instead of the brakes, and that's where we're heading. Unless something dramatically changes and you know, everyone wakes up and says, "Oh, holy, this is bad." And let's hope it happens, but I'm not convinced it will. And that's sort of the funny thing about, you know, the federal government says trust us, or the, you know, Musqueam Indian Band trust us, but I don't know. I I you know, I'm a lawyer. I want to see it in writing. I want to see it in an agreement. I want to see it in legislation. And so far, we haven't got any of that, other than some, you know, promises from people that if you ever sued on them, they wouldn't be worth anything. They're not binding, right?
Yeah. So is man, I don't even know where to go with this. But you have any good news for us, Wes?
Well, I mean, I just hope, you know, I'm just hoping that you know, people start seeing, you know, the whole thing is, the public is, as one scholar had said about this. I can't remember his name, out of a university, a law professor. He says that, you know, we're like an ostrich society, and we just put our head in the sand and we're not seeing it. And or else another prominent lawyer from that's Mr. Isaacs has been saying, it's like, and I agree with him. It's like, you know, the old, oh, we're going to throw the frog in the cold water and then turn on the temperature and, and boil him to death. You won't notice. So what the key here is to get the public realizing the holy, you know, s time. Oh, this is bad. And you know, with public pressure, and it could, you know, put the brakes on it and get it back to normality. And you know, an example of that would be, if you recall back, just before the election, with David Eby was about to put in to the Land Act the entitlement that Aboriginals have, you know, say, basically, you know, a veto power, right? And then what happened is people found out about it and went ballistic, and then he pulled back on it. So the governments do listen to people, and so the only solution in my political view, it's not a professional view, is that the public needs to know, and that's why I've decided I'm going to speak out. This is ridiculous, and if I can touch 20,000, 5,000, 1,000 people, it's going to help, and everyone needs to speak out and say, no, this isn't acceptable. We're not going to take this. When I bought my property back in 20 years ago, I bought it for myself, not to suddenly have a new landlord on it. And so people need to realize that, and renters need to realize that if this goes as badly as it could go, their rental properties at risk. And keep in mind that Musqueam, reserve case I told you about, where the Musqueams jacked up the rent every time they had a chance. What would happen if the Aboriginals are in control of a lot of property in Vancouver? They're not subject to the same legislation as non-Aboriginals are, like the Land Title Act and the Rental Act and all those other acts that sort of give renters opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have, and limit landlord abuse and all that. The Residential Tenancy Act, I was going to say, sorry, but none of that applies. So they're going to lose rights too. So people have to understand, it's just not the landowners that are potentially affected, it's businesses, renters, and landowners. So everyone's affected. And so the message has to get out, and that before it gets too late, if it's not already too late.
Well, yeah, I've been trying to wake Canadians up for the better part of 10 years. And, every once in a while they have a moment. The Freedom Convoy was a moment. And there's been some other moments where people get upset and say something. But hey, look at it this way. It's not that the whole of the Western civilization has gone down this same route, because look at your home away from home. You're in Florida, and Ron DeSantis has gone the other direction with this kind of thing. So recently, they passed through the legislator in Florida. I don't know how far this has gone along, so I'm not definite on this one, but I know that they're trying to abolish property taxes in Florida so that Floridians will have the enjoyment of their property without having to worry about having liens put on it because municipal government comes in and says you owe us a bunch of money. They're saying, DeSantis is saying, no. It's a fundamental question of do you own your property? If you down the road have a lien on your property because of taxation, that shouldn't be the case. You should own it outright. And if the government needs to make revenue, they'll have to do it in other ways. This is how far along is that? Have you been paying attention to that?
I haven't too much, but I know it passed. They passed legislation that would limit the amount of taxation that the state government can put on your house. And I can tell you, property taxes down in Florida are pretty high compared to everywhere else. And I can tell you, they're very high for what I have down here. But it'll be nice to see a little bit of a reduction or a big reduction. I'm not sure. I haven't really paid attention to it. But you're right. The other thing with the U.S. is they work on a state system. So in Canada, we have a federalist system where we have the federal government and the provinces, whereas in the U.S. it's the United States. So the states, you can have some states that are completely different than others in terms of taxation or rules and regulations. And fortunately for me, I'm sitting in Florida. I can tell you that is somebody that I'm very satisfied with.
Yeah, DeSantis. Well, I'm moving to Texas. I'll be there soon. And it turns out Governor Greg Abbott is looking to do similar things. I guess they looked at what Florida was doing. And they're like, you're not going to one up us on freedom, Florida. Get out of here. And it looks like, but that's the thing. So there's this trend in the United States in the opposite direction of what's happening in Canada. There's a trend towards people wanting to get away from big government, get away from the throes of government and people over top of you, and basically, no, we want our freedom. We want to be free from all of this. This is the whole reason why people even moved to the United States in the first place, which seems to be again the opposite of what's happening in Canada. Obviously, you see it where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, that's a definite comment, but it comes from a genesis of, the U.S. was built on distrust of government, namely the British. That's why there was the big war with Britain, because you know, as I read a lot of history, but and I'm probably going to oversimplify it, but basically people wanted to be English back then, but were treated like servants, and they had enough of big government, and so the whole Constitution and so forth was built around a healthy degree of skepticism towards government and tyranny and all those sort of things, and whereas in Canada we didn't have the same reason behind becoming a country. We were given it by England. It was, and then we went from there. We started a constitution, but not on the same ground. So basically, the U.S. is entrenched in avoiding government overreach, where Canada, it seems to me, we're really open to it.
Yeah. Well, have you seen,
Understated.
because that's the understatement of the century. Yeah. But Canada, well, so that we know that there are a ton of Canadians that end up in Florida, specifically from like the Ontario region. And there, do you see like a watering down of this like patriotism and wanting to be away from it? Or do Canadians kind of conform to the US style, like it a lot when they get down there, and then head home back to their big government ways?
Well, I mean, some interesting stats that I was told by in a meeting I heard DeSantis say it. Now I haven't confirmed it, but there was about 1.2 million to 1.4 million Canadians that moved to Florida during the time of the COVID lockdowns up in Canada. Like people had enough of it, and now there's been attrition back to Canada of these people, or not stay more than 6 months a year, etc. But the people I meet and down here that are Canadian, and they're 100% full in on loving the change in politics that they get in Florida, where there's far better freedoms, and the government leaves you alone unless you're doing something really bad, and basically people are allowed to live their lives without overreach of the government. Whereas Canada, it seems like it's unfortunately going to more government reach and more restrictions, more rules, more regulations. So, I mean, you look at Trump, and I know if I say the word Trump, Canadians are going to yell, but he's done a good job of reducing regulation. That's one of his
Yeah.
mandates, right? And there was a fellow, Jason Kenney, out in Alberta, that was the premier. He was hell bent to do that as well. So there are some Canadian politicians that understand the need to reduce regulation and let people just live their lives, because I'm an old guy, I'm 61. Do I need to be told what to do on every turn of whatever I do? Of course not. I've lived a life, and I'm going to make some good decisions, I hope. But the Canadian government seems to think that they need to control you a lot more than I like, at least. So and that's an understatement for sure.
Well, you can see the fruits of that right now. US has under Trump become once again a net exporter of energy. Canada is going the opposite direction. They're a net importer of electricity now. That's crazy. Like I never thought I'd ever see that day with all the, hydro dams and everything that are in Canada. They're now a net importer of electricity, and they just lost the bid for supplying Japan with energy. The U.S. just jumped in there and scooped it up a $56 billion contract just yesterday. I mean, it's unreal. I think it's pretty clear at this point. Freedom is the better way. Liberty is the better way, allowing people to and enterprise to do its own thing and keep the government out of it. But I mean, when will people learn? I was like, I ask myself this question every day. When's Canada going to learn its lesson?
Well, I think it just, the biggest problem with Canada right now, in terms of why aren't they learning their lesson? Well, the mainstream media and all the restrictions on podcasts and the the censorship legislation that's coming down the pike and already exists. The message doesn't get out very well in Canada, whereas of course in the US you have the First Amendment, and it allows people to say just about anything they want, when they want to, and how they want to say it, and that's the distinction. So the messages of freedom are definitely available in the U.S. and in Canada. They're heavily censored and restricted, and the mainstream media is going to put forward narratives that are helping the government in power right now. I mean, you go back to that Musqueam Indian agreement, and you read the mainstream media, you think that everything is, oh, there's nothing to see here. It's a nothing burger.
Yeah.
Everything's fine, and that is absolutely untrue, because the law. If you read the law, and I know all the cases. I've read them ad nauseum. I'm deeply concerned because I read case law and I understand, judicial trends, but if you read just the mainstream media, you get this impression that I'm full of what, and there's nothing to see here. But it's far from the truth, because I would not get on a podcast or write articles and raise alarm bells if I didn't think there was a real problem here.
No, I mean, you've got a lot at stake. You've got
Yeah.
other things on the go. I understand why you wouldn't want to raise an issue if it wasn't really an issue. Yeah, that's an understatement as well. But yeah, I mean, this is where we're at with this, and Wes, I mean, I really appreciate you coming out and doing exactly that, because I mean, with the Canadian media and the way it stands right now, I think it's enough to make Kim Jong Un blush on the ability to really propagandize the people of Canada. Because I mean, I look at it this way: I think North Koreans, the fact that they're not allowed to leave, kind of gets them. They kind of clue in that it's all BS. But in Canada, people actually buy it. They actually believe it. They believe what they're being told, and it's because they have no, or they largely, to a large degree, have no other way of looking at it. Unless you turn on the internet and you get onto the right channels, you're not going to find that information. It's just not available to a number of Canadians. But man, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and talk with us and tell us your actual legally informed opinion on topics like this.
Well, thank you for having me. I just want to make sure that the message gets out to the public that, we got a concern and we need to put the brakes on it in a hurry. And there are avenues to stop it from continuing to spiral in the wrong direction. And ultimately you can't, like a lot of people are saying, oh no, the judges are going to, stop this and it'll all be perfect. Well, it, no, no. I mean, the decisions have been going one way, not they've always been improving the Aboriginal title. They haven't been getting, restricting Aboriginal title rights. So unless that reverses in a hurry, you're that car heading towards rear-ending the big semi truck, and you got your foot on the gas, not on the brake. And we gotta
Mhm.
we gotta get that brake pumping pretty hard to stop what could be a catastrophe for British Columbia and Canada.
We got a few comments here before we head out. We've got Granite Man for $2 says, if native takes land, will be anarchy. It's, yeah, more of a statement than a question. Also saying 1,400 Musqueam take over the land with 3 million people. Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Chris for 5 says, guys, I hope Canada doesn't regret Carney opening your markets and the Arctic to China. This is almost declaration of war against American interests. Well, it's true. I mean, Donald Trump has really asserted the renewal of the Monroe Doctrine in recent times. He does not want foreign interests in the region, and Canada's a big roadblock on that one. I mean, we saw what happened to Maduro. I don't think they're going to do the same thing with Mark Carney, but obviously Canada is a bit of a roadblock on that one, on this road to what would it be, North Fortress North America. Do you have any quick thoughts on that, the Monroe Doctrine and how that really plays out?
Yeah, I'm really not that familiar with it. I've just been, anecdotally watching what's happening, so I can't really comment on it from a legal point of view. I just haven't sort of deep dived into that area. But I, as a Canadian, I struggle with whenever Canada is fighting the US over these things. And I know there's a huge anti-Trump sentiment up in Canada and again, it's largely driven by the mainstream media. If you read it, if you find an article written by the mainstream media about Trump that's positive, send it to me because I don't think it exists. It's like
Yeah.
they talk about in the US, it was 93 or 96% bad press for Trump. And, Kamala Harris was, 80% or 90% good press or whatever. Well, in Canada, it's like 100% bad press for Trump. But the point is like, here's our great neighbor that's, basically providing us with a tremendous amount of benefits, including security and so forth. And we're, going after them and not supporting them and being rude to them. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Anyone that's a good negotiator would understand, Trump's negatives and positives. And one is just to be nice to him and, treat him nicely. And probably Canada would be way better off right now on the trade front and everywhere else if you showed some humility like all the other countries have that have been able to negotiate trade agreements with the US. You see Trump going around the world and people are rolling out the red carpet or flying planes over and making him feel really good. And Canada, basically is almost dumping on him instead, which is just so unwise.
Well, I think
But
it's worse. They're incredibly two-faced. You got Mark Carney, who will be nice to his face, say really nice things, and then go off to the media in Canada and say awful things as if Trump doesn't have a television. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it's really a bad position. But I fly the 51st flag, but it's a joke just to kind of rile people up because people take it way too seriously. Sometimes you need to just tell people perhaps go outside, touch grass. Like, like Donald Trump isn't like hiding in your bushes trying to ruin your life, as it would seem some people look at the world these days. But
well,
Wes, oh, go ahead.
it's a big joke though. Canada will never be the 51st state because as it stands, then suddenly 40 million Democratic voters are suddenly on the books, and the Republicans will never get back into power. So yeah, they're not going to take Canada as it is because, well, the Democrats might, but the Republicans won't because they're going to be a whole slate of voters that aren't going to go with them, except maybe Alberta and Saskatchewan and the interior of British Columbia and a little bit of Manitoba, but the rest of it would be a Democratic enclave for the Democratic president that would be in power.
Yeah, I absolutely don't want that. I don't want that at all. Well,
so
thanks, you
so
guys.
there's no 51st state, 100% guaranteed just because of that.
Fair enough. All right, Wes. Well, thank you so much
Okay.
for joining me. Stay on the line. Stay on the line, but I'm gonna close the live stream. Thank you guys all for
Okay.
joining us today for this discussion. This is an important discussion, just like any of these topics, but like this is the real immediate thing. Someone like Wes comes on the show, gives us gives us his time to share this message out with a genuine legal outlook on this and the expertise that he brings to the table. This is why it's important that you guys share this stuff out. So if you have an opportunity, hit that share button, put it out on your Facebook, put it out on your whatever, anywhere you can get this information out. That would be much appreciated because, like I said, Wes is taking his time out of his day to bring this to us. So thank you all so much. We'll see you guys all tomorrow night for the Marty and Clyde live stream. We'll see you all at 6:30 Pacific time tomorrow. Good night, everyone.